Peace, peace, peace to the gods and the earths. Otep to my Kemites. Assalamu alaikum to my brothers and sisters in Islam. Ashe and Uhuru to my long-lost relatives on the continent. Black power to the Panthers, both new and true. Salute and honors to the Moors. God bless and give thanks for another day and another episode of United Black America Radio. This is the show that I wish I had when I first came into Black consciousness. And the reason for that is, my mission here is to give you the information that you can use to live a Black and conscious lifestyle today, right? Not in some far off future. The information that I give you empowers you to take action in the face of white supremacy and to gain knowledge of self. We do that by bringing the best minds in the community together to make this one of the most powerful programs for Black men and women anywhere. And of course, as always, family, as you all listen to this, remember that we don't have to be uniform in our opinion to be unified in our intention. We don't have to be uniform in our opinion to be unified in our intention. And, even with the greetings that I give you all, there are a lot of opinions that come into play. Some of you all have been miseducated, which is a double negative, you know what I'm saying? Because you come out of the system of white supremacy, where you've been miseducated, and you come into the conscious community, and then you continue to receive miseducation from these so-called conscious scholars, right, that feed you any old BS. They can, sit in a corner in their house, open up their laptop, create a YouTube video, or get up on stage, and because they sound good to you, you accept what they're saying as the truth. And that's dangerous, family, because they could, who knows who that person is. We don't know if that person is qualified to teach us anything. As far as we know, they're just getting up there and giving us their opinion, and there's a difference between facts and opinions. And so, like I said, there's a lot of contention, there's a lot of opinion when it comes to just the greeting that I give you all. Because if I call you black man, black woman, the knee-jerk reaction sometimes can be, well, brother, black's not a legal status. Or, brother, there's no such thing as black. I'm not a crayon. Don't call me a crayon. Y'all heard that before? I mean, that's one of those things that I'm talking about. That's a product of the whole YouTube and Facebook conscious culture, right? And that's not a true reflection of our culture. These are needless debates. Of course, I don't mean black in a legal sense. Of course, I'm not calling you a crayon, When I say black power, when I say black man, black woman, this is a colloquialism, right? It's like I call you family. I call you all my family. You're a part of my extended family. Of course, you don't live with me. You're not a part of my immediate family, for the most part. So there's that, family. We don't have to be uniformed in our opinion or our background to be unified in our intention. So with all that being said, I am Asad Malik, your gracious host here at United Black America Radio. And I'm also the executive officer of United Black America and the chairman of the Pan-African Alliance. And speaking of United Black America, this week we started our spring work study group, So I want to give a quick shout out to everybody that's involved in that. And, I want to give you a shout out by name because it takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, you know what, I'm willing to put in the work for our people. I understand that I don't know everything and I can always learn a little more. I want to be a part of a more disciplined and true culture that really represents what our people should be about. I'm not talking about all that Facebook bickering. I'm not talking about debates. I'm not talking about protesting for nothing. I'm not talking about going to lectures and, getting dressed and, in your dashikis and your boobas and your crowns and all of that so you can go out and show out and say that you're doing something but not really achieving anything. And I'm also not talking about that mental masturbation, sitting around debating and doing all that armchair revolutionary work. Nah, none of that. These brothers and sisters decided that they were going to participate in our 8-week-long course, become certified members, and in doing so, they become the future of Black history. And so let me give a shout out to Ashley, Ama. Let me give a shout out to Umeme. I got it right. Melanice, Alika. Let me give a shout out to Brother Malik. I want to give a shout out to our 2 Melissas. We have one in St. Louis and one in Kansas. I want to give a shout out to Angelique, Jelani. And in fact, Jelani wrote me a letter, or an email rather, before he joined the group. And so I'm going to read that in just a second. Let me give a shout out to Angelina. Let me give a shout out to Sister Reese, Angelique, Brother McChristian, Ashley, Monica, Brandon out in Houston, Omiyaku, Brandon in the 704. Let me give a shout out to Lenitra, Catrice, Shayla, Twisha, Timberly, Ajamu, Brother Kane, and Rochelle. So all of these black men and women stood up, and they're putting in work on behalf of their people. And so I can't wait to see how they progress into the community, how they progress within our organization, and how they grow as individuals. Almost every day I get emails, I get phone calls, I get text messages from members who have gone through this exact same program, thanking us and telling us about how it's changed their lives. And so, I really appreciate that. Keep them coming. They mean a lot to me. They let us know that we're on the right path. And as I transition out of the United States permanently, I'm going to take all of that with me. And so for those of you who are listening to this and you don't know, I'm actually leaving the United States this year permanently. I'm done. And I'm going to the continent to create a global unified movement. So I'm a missionary for this. I'm about this life. I'm a missionary for Black consciousness, family. And so that's what I'm doing. That's my life's mission. So if you don't have a life mission, you're not living on purpose. You're just living by default. Somebody else makes your schedule for you. You wake up, you figure out what you want to do, and you're subject to your whims, and you don't really get anything done. But by living according to a life mission, you're living on purpose. So I feel like I'm about to get off on a rant. Y'all know how I do, so let me focus. Before we get into our reader listener emails, this show is brought to you by United Black America Web Hosting. United Black America Web Hosting. You can find us at ubahosting.com. So I changed up the prices over there. Used to be you can get hosting for $8, right? Now you can get hosting for $5 a month. Basic web hosting will only cost you $5 a month. And so we, create your website. We upload WordPress for you so you don't have to meddle with that and figure it out and read complicated technical instructions. So we'll get that going for you. And then we hand the site over to you. It's yours. You can do what you want with it. And, each and every month, pay $5 and you're ready to go. We have a second package. Our second package used to cost $27. All right. Now it is only $10 per month. All right. So with this second package, it's called a brand builder package. You get full website hosting, just like with the basics, but you also get logo design. We will design a logo for you. Now, I know what y'all are saying. $10 a month, you're going to design me a logo. What is it going to look like? For real. A lot of times you'll go to graphic artists and they'll charge you $300, right, for a logo. $300 for a logo, $150 for a logo, $50 for a logo. Nah, we do $10 per month. And because I work for the community, because we work for the family, and we have a team of graphic designers on hand, we can afford to charge $10 per month. So you can get that taken care of. I know you've been thinking, you know what, I need a logo for my side hustle, or I need a personal logo. We can get that taken care of for you, family. $10 a month, and you'll have your website. And then we have an elite package. The elite package is only $15 a month. $15 a month. We will give you full, complete, 100% web design. Again, full, complete, 100% logo design, and full and complete web hosting. All right. And what if I want to make changes to my website? We allow you to make changes to your website yourself. If you want us to do it, we can do it for you. And again, $15 a month, unlimited, full hosting, full website design, full logo design. Man, look on the internet and see if you can find anybody willing to do that. And if you already have a website, okay, so let's say you signed up with HostGator months ago. We can migrate your site over to us for free. All right, we can migrate your site over to us for free. So if you signed up with one of these other companies, get started with us, ubahosting.com. Click on the Sign Me Up tab at the top, and you can see all our different options. That's where you go to pay. That's where you go to get started. And then after that, it's an automated process. I'll probably give you a call sometime the same day that you sign up to make sure that we got all the details correct. And we'll go from there, family. So ubahosting.com, ubahosting.com. All right, family, let's get into these reader-listener emails. Earlier, I mentioned that one of the members of our Spring Work Study program shot us a letter, and so an email, rather. So I'm going to go ahead and read that and then give him my response. He writes, "Peace and power, God. My name is Jelani, and consciousness has not always been a part of my life growing up. Religion was something that was forced upon me from the age of 7, and if I questioned anything, I was told I would go to hell." Well, around the age of 24, I began to lose focus in Christianity because a lot of things did not make sense. And at this point is where I began to read outside of the Bible, so I joined the new Black Panther Party. So that's the brother's letter. And I know a lot of you all out there can relate. And in fact, Professor Manu Ampim, who's coming on in just a few minutes, he has a very similar story. I mean, he didn't join the new Black Panther Party, but, he talks about how he was told that if he didn't become a Christian, or if he didn't go to church, or if he didn't become a 100% full believer, he would go to hell. And he was like, well, what did I do? Why do I have to go to hell? Is it because I don't know something that I end up going to hell? Or, what is this about? You know what I'm saying? And I sympathize with that. I feel you on that. In fact, that's part of my story as well. I never really believed in the whole doom and gloom and, if you don't obey the Bible 100%, you're going to hell. And if you don't follow all these archaic rules that are written in Exodus and Leviticus and all of this, that you're going to end up going to hell. And if you don't believe exactly the way that your particular version of Christianity believes, then you're going to go to hell. And all of this from a God that supposedly loves you. So that didn't make sense to me either, brother. I'm feeling you on that. And in terms of joining the Black Panther Party, Black Panther Party is it's a good organization. It's a good organization to be a part of. And I'm not saying it's good because they're militant. I'm not saying it's good because I'm a member. But I am saying it is a good organization because it gives you insight into a part of our community that you might not know about. Right. And so they definitely have their own culture. They have their own way of doing things. And I salute them and I salute their efforts. Their hearts are in the right place for the most part. I would just say that they focus a little too much on Albions and they focus too little on resolving the problems that we have internally. And so I would just say, and suggest that we go back to taking care of our communities first, because the best offense sometimes is a real good defense. You feel me? The best offense sometimes is a real good defense. So there you go. Got another letter from, I believe this is from a sister. Her name is Lavelle, and she writes, I believe that we as black people need to stop looking for the green light and approval from other races, especially Caucasians. That's our biggest problem, depending on them. She's saying that depending on the Caucasians is our biggest problem. I came into consciousness a few years ago listening to my mother and her boyfriend speak to my brother and I about black issues here in this white supremacist America. I would love to see my black people come together in unity and black group economics. I live in the Midwest, not far from St. Louis area, and I'm really tired of hearing about what these white supremacist police officers are doing to our youth. I strongly believe that in black schools, black history should be taught as early as first grade to awaken our children's spirits and awaken them to the plight of black people here in America and how we can use this information to strengthen us as a people and learn that once and for all that we are all we need to survive and grow as a people. Appreciate that letter. Got a lot of good points in there, a lot of good jewels. And so I'm going to touch on just a few things. Number one, group economics is what you mentioned. And I want to stress this particularly to those of you who lead organizations out there or who might have, your own one-man movements, your one-woman movements going on. Look, family, we cannot practice group economics if you are out there begging for donations. We cannot build off of donations. All right, we cannot build off of donations. Now, I'm not talking about Kickstarter, where you're producing something in return for, people investing money in your project, right? So if I'm going to give you money, I need to get something from it. In other words, you need to be producing goods and services that benefit the community. Family, that's how economies are built. That's how economies are built. An economy is based on a nation's GDP, gross domestic product, what they can produce, right, in terms of goods and services. You cannot build an economy on donations. And besides, a lot of you all are so thirsty for donations that you're willing to go and apply for government grants, right? Bank loans. Did you think about the fact that by getting a government grant or a bank loan, you're putting your organization directly under white supremacist control? Do you ever think about that? And if you're going to approach me with, why don't you donate money to this cause, or we need you to donate money to this cause? First of all, Where's this money going? Right? How is this money going to be used to achieve your cause? I donated, I used to donate almost on a daily basis a couple of years back when I first came into the community because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And then I was like, you know what? Hold up. There's some scam artists in the community, man. That's another reason why we as an organization exist, right? We are the drop squad on these scam artists. There are a lot of people who want to take the stage to stroke their egos. There are a lot of people who want to take the stage for money. They want to come out to your city and, we need you to give us $3,000 so we can come out and electrify the people and remind the people of who they are and get the people knowledge of self. But all you're really doing is putting on a stage show, right? A minstrel show. And then there are some members of the community who are in it for the sex. And I'm stealing Professor Manu Ampim's thunder, so we're just going to hold up. But hold that thought. As you listen to his interview, he's going to really build on this. And this is coming from a brother who's been a member of the community for decades, the conscious community for decades. So he's had behind-the-scenes looks at how some of these people operate. And he's going to drop that on you all in a few. So I'm off on tangent right now. Y'all know how I do. Group economics. Group economics is based on the exchange of goods and services, family, not donations. So don't come over here begging for donations and donate to this cause and donate to that cause. Ain't nobody donating to you, man. We don't know what you're doing with that money. That's not group economics. That's exploitation. You feel me? Especially if you're using that money to pay your rent. Go get a job. Start a side hustle. Something. But I'm not donating. All right, that's enough of that. She writes that she lives in the Midwest and she's tired of hearing about what these white supremacist police officers are doing to our youth. Yeah, they're doing it to us all. They're a mechanism of white supremacy. And I think white supremacy is another one of those terms that we all misinterpret. And so I'm going to break it down real quick. I want you to think of white supremacy like the operating system that controls your laptop or your cell phone or any computerized device that you might use. Now, you can't necessarily see the operating system. If you could, it'd look like a bunch of codes and things like that. It'd look like the Matrix, I guess. You can't see the operating system, but that operating system controls everything that happens on that device. You feel me? White supremacy is the same way. White supremacy is the operating system of the Western world, and it controls everything that goes on. So that's why we talk about sovereignty, and we're going to have a lot more episodes on sovereignty in the future. But we're talking about abandoning this operating system. Look, family, if you think you're going to make changes to the operating system by marching or protesting or, by saying, I don't like the way this system is designed, they don't give a damn that you don't like the way the system is designed. It's not designed for your benefit. It's not designed for your benefit. You're a side thought. You're an afterthought. It's only when you start disrupting them that they start launching the weapons of white supremacy against you. So you can go along to get along, and, they might take care of you for a time. If you're a good step and fetch it Negro, they'll let you in, to their country clubs. They'll let you into their fraternities. Sometimes. Because we got this fraternity that just got shut down in the news. And a lot of you all count that as a victory. Fraternity out in Oklahoma, they were caught doing some racist chants. And, the school basically shut the fraternity down. So y'all are all cheering, right? These white folks are just going to go and join the Klan. They're just going to go and join a different fraternity. You think you're going to be able to change their mindset? You think you're going to be able to change the architecture, the operating system that runs the Western world? Absolutely not. So that's why we're advocates of sovereignty. We're advocates of leaving this system behind, getting off of this operating system and building one of our own. While that task seems far off, while that task seems extremely difficult and unfathomable to some of you all plantation-minded Negroes, it is very possible. Cultures are built intentionally. Cultures are built intentionally. A few episodes back, I talked about how many of the nations that exist today did not exist when we were marching for civil rights. One of those nations could have been a nation founded by us. Marcus Garvey's been talking about a United States of Africa since 1914. And even prior to him, other Pan-Africanists like Blyden discussed the concept of United States of Africa. But how soon we forget, and I am definitely on tangent. I'm going to end my comments there because we're already into 20 minutes, and I want to give Professor Manu Ampim all the time he needs to come in and build with the family. And so thank you all so much for everybody that has stood up and joined our spring work study group. We had 300 people overall that signed up for that work study group. And out of that 300 people, I gave 70 phone calls, and I narrowed it down to those who I thought would be the best fits for the organization and who I thought would work well together. And so far, I think my judgment has been correct. Now, if you signed up for the work study group and you did not get a call from me, or you did not get involved, or whatever the case is, then it's because we might have got you lost in the mix. So, feel free to hit us back up. We'll get you in the next cycle. Next cycle starts in about 6 weeks. So that's that. We're going to take a short media break, and on the other side, we're going to come back with Professor Manu Ampim. Peace.
The person I'm going to talk about next is a person who's very near to me. A person who's a second-generation revolutionary. So please help me in welcoming Brother Tupac Shakur.
Yeah. First, I want to say peace to my mother. She's not here, but I got to give a peace out to her, because I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for my mother. And I looked on the front of this thing, and it says, start from within to rebuild our original greatness, right? Okay, well, that's what my mother did. You know what I'm saying? And I'm listening about freedom fighters and strugglers. Well, you got to understand that when it was in to have a gun and to be in the street, my mother gave that up to be in a house and wash the dishes, you know what I'm saying, and feed us and put the thoughts in our brains, you know what I'm saying? Because we didn't get any of that history from all of those soldiers that we lost. We got none of that. They all went to jail, if you can remember. They all went to penitentiaries. We didn't see none of that knowledge. If it was not for my mother who stayed home and didn't go out and do all that, then I wouldn't have had shit, excuse my language, but I wouldn't have been nowhere. So what I want to do, hopefully, is I want to be, I am Tupac Shakur. I have to be a reminder that we can't chill out. No, it ain't time to cool out and banquets and all that. It's still on. It's on just like it was on when you was young, and you want to say fuck that just like you said fuck that back then. So how come now that I'm 20 years old ready to start some shit up, everybody telling me to calm down? Don't curse, go to school, go to college. Well, fuck that. We had colleges for a while now. You know what I'm saying? And it's still Brenda's out there, and niggas is still trapped. You know what I'm saying? And it gets me hurt. because I understand that it's not going to stop. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to stop until we stop it. And it's not just white men that's doing this to Brenda, and it's not just white men that's keeping us trapped. It's black. You know what I'm saying? We have to find the new African in everybody, in all of us. Because if we keep running around looking for black and who got the most colors on and who got the baddest dashiki on, we still gonna get, excuse my language, fucked. Because it irks me that my mother right now is going through, she has to get clean. This is somebody who I watched travel the whole country, you know what I'm saying, during a time when women were scared to speak up for the Black Panthers. She spoke at Harvard, Yale, everywhere. And now I see my mother as what's really going on. You know what I'm saying? And I don't see no big parades around my mother now. And she done got a dozen fucking awards. And I don't see nobody there. You understand what I'm saying? So about all this, I take that lightly. I take all this lightly. What I want you to take seriously is what we have to do for the youth. Because we're coming up in a totally different world. This is not the same world that you had. This is not the 60s. This is not that. We grew up BC, before crack. That should say it all. You understand what I'm saying? We did not grow up without parents. You had parents that told you this and that, and this is what went on back in the day. Now you don't have that. You have young kids, 14, coming home, their mama is smoking out or doing it to their best friend to get the product. You understand what I'm saying? So that means that it's not just about you taking care of your child, it's about you taking care of these children. Because that's what's out here. It's a gang of children. You understand what I'm saying? And it hurts. It hurts, but it bothers me, not hurts. It bothers me that I have to sidestep my youth to stand up and do some shit that somebody else supposed to be doing. You understand what I'm saying? There's too many men out here for me to be doing it. Because it ain't my turn yet. I'm supposed to be following behind him getting the knowledge. I don't even got a chance to get the fucking knowledge. I can't go to college. There's too much problems out here. I don't got the money. Nobody do. You understand what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is it's not as easy as we mapping it out to be. And we got to stay real. We got to stay real. Before we can be New African, we got to be black first. Right. You understand? We got to get our brothers from the street like Harriet Tubman did. Why can't we look at that and see exactly what she was doing? Like Malcolm did. The real Malcolm. Before the Nation of Islam. You got to remember this was a pimp. You know what I'm saying? The push and all that. We forgot about all of that. And our strive to be enlightened, we forgot about all our brothers in the street, right. About all our dope dealers, our pushers and our pimps, right. And that's who's teaching the new generation. That's right. Because y'all not doing it. I'm sorry, but it's the pimps and the pushers who's teaching us. So if you got a problem with how we was raised, it's because they was the only ones who could do it. They the only ones who did it. While everybody else wanted to go to college, and you know, yeah, everything has changed. They was the ones that was telling you the white man ain't shit. Here you go. Check this out, young blood. You take this product, you switch it, you make money, and that's how you beat the white man. You get money, you get the hell up out of here. Nobody else did that. So I don't want to hear shit about nobody telling me who I can't love and respect until you start doing what they did. You understand what I'm saying? To me, this is Mecca. You know what I'm saying? This is the black family. I see it here. But what makes it even that much more sadder, what makes me want to cry, is because as soon as I leave here, so does Mecca. You understand what I'm saying? We're going back to the real deal. Right out there, you're going to see them same sisters and Brenda. They right out there. And y'all going to get in y'all cars and drive the fuck home. You know what I'm saying? And I apologize, but check this out. You can't be no more offended by my curses than what's really going on. That's real. That's real, y'all. That's real. Y'all got to really be truthful. You got to be truthful. Because we letting the media and the white man cut us off. You letting them tell you that the rappers ain't real, and you know, you got to either be, you know, the intelligent person or you're a gutter person. We all the same. We all feel it like y'all feel it. I just can't hold a straight face when I see it. Right. This is proof that we can be together. The young black male is the future of us. And the young black chick is the future of us. It's going to be what you put into it. So if you don't put shit into it, don't get mad when you blow up.
Peace, family. Our guest today has a Master's of Arts in History and African American Studies from Morgan State University. He earned that master's with a thesis entitled The Revolutionary Martin Luther King Jr., which is being expanded into a 2-volume work entitled Martin Luther King, The Evolution of a Revolutionary. He is currently a tenured professor of history at Contra Costa College out in San Pablo, California. He is the intellect behind the 7-step primary research methodology home study course and the author of the 6-part essay on the vanishing evidence of classical African civilizations. We are honored to roll out the red, the black, and the green carpet for our scholar, Professor Manu Ampim. Welcome to United Black America Radio.
Thank you, Brother Assad. I really appreciate being here, brother.
It's our honor. It's our pleasure. Professor, I know your time is valuable, so we're going to keep this concise, but take all the time you need to build your thoughts for the family. So in the first half of this interview, I want to really talk about your perspective on the current state of melanated people, both here in the United States and abroad. And in the second half, I want to focus specifically on your role as an educator. But before we get into all that, could you tell the family a little bit about you and how you came to walk on your current path?
Well, I appreciate the question because the sociology of knowledge is always critical and instructional, because we see people in a semi-finished state where they've made contributions and we don't always know their path. For me, I used to say that back in 1984, I remember one Saturday I called my father, who, as most of us, he had moved away from the home when I was about 13. My brother and I had an impact on us here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but my father sought counseling, and the counselor told him he should stay close so that we would have access to him. So I called him one day, and I said, Dad, I'm saved. And his first question is, from what? And I said, well, saved. He said, yeah, but from what? You still got to go out. You got to compete in the world. You got to work. You got to deal with challenges.
That's right.
And then he made some other statements that had me puzzled, because I had joined the church. I was 20 years old. I had joined the church out of fear. Somebody told me, I'd never heard this before. Someone told me that if I didn't join the church, I was going to hell. And I was saying, for what? What did I do? Because I had never heard this before. So my father then dropped some knowledge on me, and I was stunned, and so I said, wow. So I thought Dad was going to go to hell. So he said something. He said, well, son, I know it's difficult for you to understand what I'm telling you, so why don't you come over and check out some of my books? So I don't know, things changed. I had a lady at the time, and I decided that it was too many things I was thinking about. I didn't want to see her anymore. Finally, about a week later, I went over to my father's place across the bay in Oakland. I was in the San Francisco area, and only thing I remember is us embracing at the door, saying, you know, what's up, how's everything? And he walked over to his closet and opened his closet, and I was stunned. I was shocked at what I saw. I mean, I was frozen in the moment. I mean, I was really mummified in that state because I saw a lot of life-changing titles, self-explanatory titles like Marcus Garvey, the story of Black Moses, books like Stolen Legacy, books like The Destruction of Black Civilization, books like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and these different titles, Ethiopian, the origin of civilization, man, God, and civilization, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. I said, what? So it took, I don't know how long to unthaw myself. I was stunned. And the only thing I remember on that day is that I walked out of his place with an armful of books, ready to learn. I've never, I've never lost that feeling of, at that point I was enthused, I was intrigued, I was energized, but in that frozen state, but also became angry because I was angry at the church. No one had ever told me that. I was angry at the school, thinking about all those years I was miseducated, misguided. So I used to tell the story that it was in '84 when I had this transformative moment. And then over the years, I began to recognize that, wait a minute, it couldn't have only been that moment because why was I so receptive? Then I started to think back to my early childhood where my mother and father laid a foundation in their own way. So like there was an encyclopedia set in my brother's room. So every night going to bed, we had an encyclopedia set there. There was a small library, and every time we asked how do you spell something, their refrain was look it up. So that's the environment that we grew up in. Even when we celebrated Christmas, I remember it was a big family occasion to paint that white guy black. And that was a big family occasion. I remember my brother and I going out in the Fillmore district in San Francisco, playing with our friends, nothing different. But it was something a little bit different because we were the only ones that our parents took us down the street to the daishiki shop to ask us to pick out what we wanted. So we'd be outside playing in daishiki. And the thing that was really intriguing to me, I said, you know what? Now that I think even more about it, I never thought much about Africa, but at the same time, I never had a negative thought about Africa and Africans. So I must definitely credit my parents and that transformative day in 1984 when my father introduced me to life-saving knowledge. This is absolutely critical. Critical. And one of the books that there was a number of books that had a tremendous impact because I had never read before, really. I mean, I would just read the paper, and the local newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, set us up for failure because what they had was what they called a sporting green. So the sports section was literally a green color, and the rest of the paper is white. So we would buy the paper for one reason, just pull out the sports page.
That's right.
You know, so that's where our mentality was, just to play sports all day and be misdirected. But I remember that the book that had the most critical impact on me when I was using my father's place as a library. I would take out books, read what I could, whatever I could understand. I read what I couldn't understand. I brought it back to him, and he never had to call me to say, "Hey, when are you going to come back through?" But it was the book by the great primary researcher Chancellor Williams, "The Destruction of Black Civilization," and it really had the greatest impact because he had went to the field, did the extensive research in Africa, and not only talked about the African constitutional system, how our system of sharing and caring was set up, but he looked at the long view. How do we go from building pyramids to living in projects and slums? And there's one of the great stories told by one of the great primary researchers in the 20th century. And so I must credit Chancellor Williams because his view from the bridge, the second part of the book is that what do we do now? What is the action plan? And I was intrigued by that, because my father and mother have always been involved with social groups, whether it was the Lions Club. They may not be the most revolutionary groups, but they're still socially active. And I saw that growing up, you know, and Eastern Star, a lot of other. My father was a part of several groups, and so I must credit Chancellor Williams as having a single greatest impact in terms of scholars,
That's right.
and of course the multi-genius himself, Sheikh Anta Diop. I was just from Senegal. I was just inspired by the high level scientific analysis, just the rigorous scholarship. You know, I mean, the same kind of rigor that Africans use to build the monuments that still confound the world, pyramids and other towering structures.
That's right.
And so I credit these individuals. And when I went to Morgan State University after I had, I say, recovered from historical amnesia in '84, my father gave me the life-saving books. Then a few months later, went to Morgan State, and then my main mentor. I had a number of people that helped guide me, but brother Walimo Taseti. I actually changed his name to Walima, which means teacher in Swahili. But brother Gary Ware, mental health, when he learned that I was on campus organizing students, active, making African history a requirement for every student that matriculates at Morgan State, I just remember him coming over to the student government office, bouncing with his African confidence,
That's right.
with his bag in hand, with a bunch of educational goodies, and
Uh-huh.
and I spent more time with the great brother Wanlimu than I would say any two students combined. I mean, we were like, and we spent so much time, and so not only was I a serious student because I knew I was behind in reading and writing. I was behind because that amnesia had taken serious effect over my thinking for 5.5 years. I went from a very good middle school student to then, in high school doing nothing other than playing sports and being misdirected. So that 5 years caught me in a way that I was behind. So I worked hard, but I had to think about why was Brother Walima spending so much time with me because he was giving me a lot. And then I finally recognized that I was also giving him nearly as much as he was giving me because,
That's right.
uh, because here's a young brother who's 20, who's 21, 22. I'm serious. I'm spending all my days reading, uh, organizing, playing. I joined organizations like the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I form an organization on campus, the Progressive Students Action Committee. But I knew that information had to be actionable. And I learned that from reading Chancellor Williams and just seeing people around me, from my parents to the great Walimu, and just people in the community in general. So all those things really had an impact on helping me to become a professional historian in the tradition of others who have used our knowledge to help build and develop the community.
And I think a lot of our listeners can really relate to that because there are 12 books that are required reading for all new members of United Black America, and you dropped about half of them. And you raised an excellent point about the importance of translating that initial excitement when you first come into knowledge and translating that into action. That consists of reading those books, absorbing those knowledge, absorbing that knowledge rather, and being able to apply those things in a practical way to everyday life. I like to tell people we don't just talk about these things to quote unquote mentally masturbate. We talk about them to affect positive change in our intellectual development, our spiritual development, and our development as a whole on the world stage. So, great story. I know a lot of our listeners can definitely relate.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, you said you came up in 1984. You were in the middle of a lot of history. You saw the rise of people out there like Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad and Malana Karenga, who I believe is also on the West Coast with you. Is that right?
That's true. Yes, that's true. There was a lot of things happening in the '80s. Jesse Jackson just ran for
That's right.
presidency. Grenada was on the agenda when the U.S. invaded Grenada. There was the independent black, National Black Independent Political Party, the
Okay.
MBIP. Yeah, and so MBIP, they decided to create another significant party to challenge the two ridiculous parties that are out there.
Right.
And but it was the Socialist Workers Party, the SWP, who had folks who had melanin that looked similar to us that they used to run an agenda to stop the development of MBIT. They actually sent people to meetings to disrupt the meetings, to hijack the agenda.
Is
And
that
so
right?
while I saw that, oh brother, while I saw that in Baltimore, I mean, I was new, but I was serious about it, and I had informed people around me. So I grew in by leaps and bounds. I mean, I went from knowing basically nothing to a couple of years. I was very informed because there was no mental handicap. And that's why I really credit my mother because she cooked full meals for us. So we don't have, even in my, I don't have health challenges. I never had mental blocks in any kind of way, but what I saw about what MBIP in the Baltimore area, as I checked in with my father, we would just check in maybe every month or so. What he's telling me about the West Coast was also happening in Baltimore. So it was a national assault on this national black independent political party. So that's why people weren't necessarily active or around during that time, wouldn't necessarily know about it. But it's an important history to know, to learn, and to teach to others about what we've done and what progress we made and what outside forces that became inside that really
That's right.
disintegrated the organization. But MBIP had a tremendous promising um, direction until it was attacked.
And that's the National Black Political Party,
The National Black Independent Political Party.
independent political party. Definitely going to
Yes.
go back and do some knowledge on that because this is honestly my very first time hearing about this particular organization. We hear about all the different myriad social groups that are, or socialist groups that are out there. And I didn't realize they were as involved in the movement as they were, both in a positive and a negative way. So we're definitely going to go back and look into that. Okay, so this is a question that I like to ask all of our guests and scholars because the answer is always different, but it's also always relevant. So I want to ask you, Professor Ampim, from your perspective as one of our greatest scholars, what's the current state of the diaspora? What are some of the biggest problems that you see that we face today? I think that's a good place to start.
I agree. Well, I mean, it's a big, as people say, the world is small. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a big world. I travel, and I can tell you that
Mm-hmm.
those day and a half, 2 day flights to
Mm,
get back home is, you can tell it's a big place.
that's right.
But I'd say that we have some serious problems and challenges because during the era of enslavement or even colonialism, the enemy was quite obvious and the
That's
problems were
right.
quite obvious. You can see change, you can feel them, and these were physical barriers that no honest person could deny. And now with the so-called newfound freedom, you have Africans that around the globe that have tried to catch up with the decadence of Europe. They
That's right.
defied the warning of French Renan. He said that we need to find out what our mission is. We can either portray it or fulfill it, but the one thing we can't do is try to catch up with the decadence of Europe and Euro America. He talked
Mm,
about this in Wretched of the Earth, but
that's
but
right.
but many of us have tended to do this, and so we're, as I see it, traveling to 19 countries, and to me, it's not about counting the places someone went. That doesn't mean anything to me. What's more
Mm,
important is what you did when you were there. What's the quantity of your work in terms, I mean, sorry, the quality of the work. What are you
that's right.
doing while you're there? And as I really systematically study us, we have a lot of work to do. The one thing that is beautiful is that anywhere we basically go, there's always people who are aware, or people might say conscious, or people that are
That's right.
culturally oriented. And that's one of the beautiful things. We no longer have an African centered movement, but we do have African centered communities around the diaspora. In other words, so wherever we go, whether it's the Bay Area, different cities, whether it's Atlanta, different places, Canada,
Mm-hmm.
different locations in the Caribbean, you can find culturally oriented people who will always continue to advance our cause. And we find that in different places. But one of the things is that we are not really, as I see it, we're not introspective enough to really challenge ourselves to get better. We
Mm,
settle. We settle for mediocrity too often. Folks say, "Well, you know how we are." No, I don't. I know how you all are, but I
that's
don't
right.
subscribe to these values. So for me to be African centered or to be a community activist or anything like that, it means to be a professional. It means to be a perfectionist. It doesn't mean secondary, low class, or because I learned this a while back that My father, I think he's the first one that impressed this upon me a while back. He used to videotape a lot of the events in the community, and one of the things that he was always upset about is that the presenters never really had an interest in examining their presentation. And he said, you all need to examine what you're presenting because just so you can see how bad you are and why you're not recruiting more people, you know. and and so he was animate about that. So when I started to learn and grow, and of course, you know, the more you learn, you begin to teach. That was one of the things that I had to do. It was painful at first, but I listened at myself. You
That's
know,
right.
and eventually I got a chance to see, you know, video of myself to see where I needed to get better and why people weren't interested because it was, you know, it wasn't interesting to them or and things where I can improve. But bottom line is that we as a community need to be more honest about where we are because not everybody that comes to us talking really are working in the best interest of the
That's
community. And it's
right.
difficult to embrace that for some people. That's why I wrote back in 1993 towards Black community development, and the subtitle was Moving Beyond the Limitations of the Lecture Model. Because
Mm.
also in the mid 1980s, beginning in 1984, we can really say that this is the year that launched the African centered movement, which became a national and eventually international phenomenon where you had African thinkers and writers and scholars
That's right.
crisscrossing the country and in some cases going overseas to spread the African centered idea, philosophy, concept, and agenda. And so this developed into a significant movement to challenge, you know, the current thinking about African and African contributions to the world. And but what I had learned is that there were people who were presenting not for the purpose of helping to build and develop the community, but they were embracing what I call the mess, and that is money and ego nurturing, and then the sex activity that went on. And so this became one of the most significant factors that helped to implode the movement from within because a lot of internal corruption that took place, and it's difficult for people that because they feel that if you say anything about quote our leaders or our scholars, then
That's right.
somebody's supposedly anti-community
That's right.
when they're not activists. That they don't know how activists have always operated because activists know the central element of any movement has to be criticism and self-criticism.
Mm.
And criticism is never inherently negative. It's neutral. It can be positive or negative.
That's right.
So it has to be developmental criticism where we critique and analyze the problems and contradictions, but we offer uh, developmental solutions, and that any serious activists will be focused on that. So I don't really see that as more enough of a norm in our communities here. And the other thing that is a main concern to me is that we have to develop our skill level whereby people can assess the quality and the value and the relevance of what's being presented to us
That's
rather
right.
than just believing anything they might see or hear. And so we really have to develop those skills. And we really, you know, lastly, brother, on this, we have to be more professional. I don't really see enough of it around. You
That's
know, I
right.
see I see some great individuals and organizations, but it's not enough. And so, to me, to be African means to be a perfectionist. It means to be a
Mm.
professional. So, if we say we're going to do a program at this time, that's the time that we start.
That's
If
right.
we say, you know, so whatever we say we're going to do it because we're men and women of integrity, and we do have people that do that, but it's also very common to have an event that supposedly starts at 6. And if they get around to maybe starting the drummers at 6:40 or
That's
something, it's
right.
okay. Well, it's not okay. Not for the professional organizer.
That's
Not for
right.
those
They call
that
that
are.
colored people time.
Yeah, exactly. And then they tried to impose that on Africa. Said no, no, no. There's two different sets of time in Africa, and there's always has been. Number one, there is the business and scientific time, and when it
That's right.
comes to that, they're absolutely exact. So you can't build pyramids and build monuments to perfection being loose and lackadaisical with
Mm.
time.
Well
So when it
said.
comes to science, when it comes to business, even the farmers, you don't just sow the seed whenever you get around to it. No, this is exact science. You don't create the oldest, most accurate solar calendar in the history of humanity based on being loose with time. So that's what I tell folks. I'm not going to let you impose your limitations on African tradition because it ain't going to work. So
That's
there's
right.
business and scientific time on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's social time. So no one really cares what time somebody shows up to the festival. That's social time. Who
That's right.
cares? But you know, too often, social time becomes all of the time, and that's how folks are so lax. Even at the college, it's crazy. We have their standards, and these black folks know that they go to the committees late, go to work late, and start all the stuff late. They know they will be fired,
That's
so they're
right.
on time. They do what they're supposed to do. But then when it comes to community stuff, then it's a whole level or two lower.
Now they're on social time.
Yeah, they're on social time, but then they want folks to just excuse them. No, no, not at all. Because all I have, brother, all I have is my, time is the one thing you can never get back.
That's
We
right.
got 168 hours a week. So health can come and go. You can change or alter your but time you can never get back. So this is why some of the greatest men and women in our tradition have been sticklers with time.
That's right.
Even the great Malcolm's position was if you didn't wear a watch, he didn't trust you, Malcolm X.
Mm.
And people would always say that you can time Du Bois's actions based on, what time of day it is. You know what he's going to be doing. And
That's
it's
right.
just a lot of people like that.
I'm
And
glad. I'm glad you're bringing that up because I know the members of the organization that are listening to this, they're rolling their eyes right now because, we really pride ourselves on professionalism and setting the standards. So you're being heard. Being on time is the starting point for everything that we do because if you can't master your time, if you can't prioritize activities in the community so that you are there on time and you've made those adjustments and you've thought it through and you've accounted for things that may come up, that tells me what state of mind you're in when it comes to these community activities and what's really important to you. So I'm glad I'm over here silently cheering you on as you're going because anyone that knows me or us, they know how important that is for us. So thank you for bringing that up.
you're welcome, brother. Yeah, just that's what professionals do, and but I think that for me, if we don't get better and more serious in those areas, I don't see the kind of significant progress happening in the diaspora that needs to happen if we're going to change our state.
That's right. That's right. Well said. Well said. Well, Professor Ampim, we're already 30 minutes into the interview, and I promise to keep it concise, but I really want you to build. You're dropping jewels on us. Real quick before we move on, earlier you mentioned an acronym, MES, money, ego, and what was the last part of that?
Sex.
Sex. And could you build on that just a little bit more? What do you mean when you say that those are pitfalls that some quote unquote leaders fall into?
Well, what I learned, and I tell you how it came to my awareness. I was
Mm-hmm.
we used to bring in the great Kwame Ture,
Mm.
Stokely Carmichael to Morgan State when I was active on campus. And one of my political mentors, just out of the blue, he just said, "Well, brother, brother Kwame has his choice of women in the audience."
That's right.
And I kind of laughed. I did laugh. I mean, I'm young. I don't know what he's talking about, and but he just dropped something in, on me into my awareness, and then I began to um, see what he meant. That there are some women that attend events just to, as we call it, compromise the brother. They're not
Mm.
there for whatever the occasion is. And reverse, there are brothers that go to and do speaking engagements for the purpose of having sexual relations in various cities. This became so much of an issue that this was the internal, I wouldn't even call it a secret, but this was something
Mm-hmm.
that was so rampant that many sisters, they just decided to just get pissed off and tell a few friends about this outrageous, dirty behavior, but not do anything with the information. So when I
Mm.
became more of more on the inside, I was still an outsider in terms of the values because I didn't subscribe to that. But what I
That's
learned
right.
is that as the African-centered movement was in its heyday in the late 1980s, there was a very large percentage, I would say most, of the brothers, very prominent, very well known. They were going in to just make money. So they would be charging $2,500 an honorarium, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, and they wouldn't go less than that. In fact, the professional lecturing became so widespread that they had to actually hire booking agencies like the American Program Bureau out of Atlanta, which is a white-owned company.
That's right.
So if you wanted to invite this quote-unquote African-centered scholar, you had to call Atlanta, and they use a couple other ones, and book it through this company because they couldn't handle all of the requests. And so this became a major business. It was about high profits, high honorariums, and it was a money motive. And so it was a lot of money being made in lectures with no plan or program. So giving a talk is okay if it's linked to something that's real and relevant, but that wasn't the case. So you had people literally giving 150 to 250 lectures a year with no plan or program, speaking to the same audience in the same city, in the same building about the same topic within a 2-month period. For what? What is that about?
That's
And
right.
so it wasn't just the professional lecturers, what I call them, but it was also the community wanting to be entertained, but also they said they need a reminder. You know what? I told them use the VHS tapes before the digital age. Use the VHS tapes, and you all play the tape if you want a reminder. But it was just about entertainment. So it was a money thing. Everything was about ego. I mean, it was kind of hard to even interact with a lot of these folks because it was a social gap in their mind. And then the sex thing. I mean, women were just very stunned that they and you don't really know sometimes. If I give a presentation, someone will come up. They'll say, Professor, great what you said. We have a local organization. We're still developing it. Your knowledge can help us. Here's my information. You don't know if that organization is legitimate or not, or where they are. And but it takes men and women of character to reject any advances if that what it turns out to be, as opposed to going along with it. So it's not just the sisters. It was some sisters doing that, but the brothers would initiate these things, and they became quite public. Like one cat came to Oakland. I didn't mention any names in my books just so people can focus on the dysfunctional behavior and not personalities. And people try to pry names out. Saying I'm not going to go there, but a guy came, spoke here, and said that he's fell off the wagon a few times with his relationship, and he indicated how long he would be in town, and he's open. I mean, it's just crazy. Just folks have just blurt out these things, and then so he had a lot of that going on. But the money, the ego nurturing, and the sex became a central part of the behavior. And for anybody to attempt to deny that, they would be either greatly naive or very dishonest because it was quite obvious. And there's a lot of victims out there who decided to walk away from the struggle to advance the community because they were turned off. And it's like when you have the people that you look up to the most who engage in that kind of behavior, it's just stunning and devastating, So that's what I mean by the mess. And we explain the whole detail in my book. And I don't really promote the book, but it really was the first, and really to this day, as far as I know, still to this day, the only book written by a community activist about the African-centered community.
And we're definitely going to be checking that out. I want to remind the family that we're going to leave a link in the show notes. So if you're out doing whatever it is you're doing, you're in the gym listening to this or driving, when you get back to a desktop or a laptop or a device, make sure you support the brother's book and pick it up because he's giving us some inside information that even I wasn't familiar with. So, honors and salute. I'm sorry. Go right ahead, Scholar.
Okay, no, and that's pretty much it. And so it just I decided to not do what a lot of other folks did at the time. They went in the back alley to complain with the lights out. So it's kind of an unprincipled criticism. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't go anywhere. I decided to to write and put in writing what the issues were, and that many people were talking about long before I started to become aware of them, and put it in a context that we can identify these issues and then move forward with solutions so that we have, so like I just say this and move on, but we need practical work. So what was happening, and we still have this, but we have a lot of study groups, study tours, lectures, all these kind of things. That's part of the problem, is that I argue that we don't need study groups. Those days have died out. We need work study groups because the purpose of study is to clarify the work that has to be done. And the same thing with all these study tours that folks are doing. For what? What is that about? is to study indefinitely. Study what? And to do what? No, we need work study tours. If people are going to go abroad and spend money and time and energy, we should be studying those things, in the African world, so we can figure out what we can do
That's right.
to make it practical. So even Kwanzaa, we don't just need to talk about the principles of Nguzo Saba. How about a practical Kwanzaa? Why
That's
not
right.
make Ojama practical? How do we develop economic enterprises, those kind of things? So that's what I'm arguing in the book. Rather than talking about these things, we need to be about implementing programs to develop the community. And so I, I think we made some progress, but there's still major challenges and issues that I see around the country and even in the diaspora in general. So those are some of those issues, brother.
That's right. That's right. And again, I'm over here silently cheering you on, trying not to make too much noise. But I think you're absolutely right when you say that we don't need more study groups. We need more work groups. And going back to the M.E.S acronym, I'm just going to touch on this real quick, and we're going to go ahead and move on. We over here, we don't criticize the individual, but we do criticize the behavior. Because rather than naming names, which can, ruffle a few feathers and rile people up and get people sort of divided against a particular individual, we want to identify that behavior that compromises the movement, compromises the integrity of the movement. And on the sex issue, in the military, we used to have a saying that loose lips sink ships. And we weren't just talking about mouths. All right, let's move on. We're gonna we over here we teach that knowledge of self is the result of understanding who you are, how you came to be, the world around oneself, and one's role in that world. So I think you would agree that it's important for us to understand how we got into the condition of miseducation that we find ourselves in today. So as a scholar, would you like to build on that? How exactly did we reach this condition of miseducation?
Well, excellent question, and that brings us to putting another great thinker and historian and educator and his work on the list, and that's none other than the great Carter G. Woodson. Woodson's
Miseducation of the Negro.
one of the great classics from 1933, and if someone read that closely, they would think that he's writing about what's happening now. What I
That's
find
right.
interesting is that people have read the miseducation, but they don't apply what he's writing about. And they think that, for example, whenever there's some problems that occur, somebody's an agent of the CIA, the FBI, or the government. Excuse me,
That's
no,
right.
people don't have to be an agent. If they read Carter G. Woodson, they've been miseducated. And if there's no back door, they'll make one for their own special benefit. He talked about that 3/4 of a century ago.
That's
And
right.
so it's the educational process or miseducation that takes place. But yeah, I agree. And that, so one of the things that we look at the past in order to clarify the present, and the past should answer questions like, who are we, where are we, and what time is it? And
That's
it's
right.
not, it's not about a superficial view of these questions, but a deep assessment of really where we are. But I say that we missed the mark, and I actually pointed this out in the book. I think we missed the mark. We had a golden opportunity, and brother, there has to be, and there will be, a systematic examination of the 1980s and the African-centered movement because it caught a large part of the world where black folks reside, definitely here in the Western Hemisphere, because it burst on the scene with tremendous force, and every country had to respond. The mainstream
That's
in
right.
different
That's right.
Caribbean places here in the U.S. and Canada. In fact, I lived in London for a year, and it was in '89 and '90, so it was still the heyday of the African-centered movement. But we missed the mark when we didn't develop any independent institutions. You have all these great thinkers and writers and educators, but where's the independent educational system? There was not one developed. There was no real thought about developing one at all. And we had the opportunity. We had people who, and, in this And there was so much energy
That's
behind
right.
this. I
That's right.
mean,
I'm thinking back to that period of time, and I think John Henrik Clark was he was definitely still alive and definitely still active, and
yes.
he was in the process of founding ASCAC and other organizations with that intention in mind, but it just didn't go through. It didn't. We didn't hold the line and sustain that momentum.
Yeah, we didn't. We definitely did not, and it was a missed opportunity because, as I said, there's many people who were more interested in maximizing profits and minimizing losses and counting the number of lectures and dollars that they would acquire on an annual basis. We missed the mark. We had an opportunity. I mean, you can have audiences packed with just a few days' notice that someone was coming in town. You had black bookstores all across the country,
That's right.
from New York to Philly to Chicago to DC to LA, even in in the Oakland area, where there's not as many of us quantitatively, but here on the West Coast, bookstores would be bustling with the books that I mentioned earlier about African culture and history and traditions and contributions to the world. But we missed the opportunity. We did, and I think that we didn't hold each other accountable. We didn't hold lecturers and scholars. It wasn't like the '60s. What in the '60s, it was all about like SNCC and other
That's right.
organizations. They were about building the community, and so it was a nice, great period in the '50s and '60s. But the '80s, we also had an opportunity, and that has not been really looked at closely enough. So there will be future writers that will assess the '80s like the '60s have been and continue to be assessed because we missed the mark when we embrace professional lecturers and just assume that all of them are working in our best interest, and they were not. And people can say anything they want to say, but as a historian, I know that when people know someone or aware of people, or maybe they're still around, it's very difficult to make a just a cold hard assessment of the behavior, the conduct.
Right.
Forget
Right.
the
Right.
name, just take the name away. It's hard. And not only is it difficult for us, it's difficult for people in the larger society itself. It's like I know that like in mainstream Egyptology, these people will never criticize a colleague. They will never contradict a colleague's position. Not certainly not publicly, not really in print. It's like they don't go there. But the only time they make a criticism, someone's passed away, at least a generation or so ago. So it's a soft approach to even when they know the person was off base, even when they know the person was wrong, they
Right.
don't do anything to make correction. And I find, brother, that we tend to do that too often ourselves. And there is that tendency, for people to not check and correct their peers because many times it is
So
the peers
important.
that have to correct their peers, and they don't do it in the interest of not wanting to be seen as negative or be seen in conflict or forget all that. What do the great ones do?
That's
The
right.
great you mentioned the great John Henry Clark. I saw the great Clark and the great Dr. Ben. I've seen them stand up in public meetings. I've seen them stand up in an ASCAC meeting, for example, in 1988 in Baltimore, National Conference, and challenge the board members, challenge the conference organizers when they didn't think that they were respecting elders. I've seen them stop proceedings. I've seen that,
That's
and
right.
so people embrace great people because they can see they've made contributions, but they don't always embrace their methods. I think we need to look at their methods and what allowed them to be able to make such an impact. So this is why I respect these men. And something else too, I noticed that even the great Ivan Van Sertima, as he got older, he was more fiery. He'll cuss somebody's ass out on the panel if they go out of line. No, seriously, if they talk crazy about Africans and they want to present Africans as nothing more than descendants of enslaved people, as opposed to original contributors to knowledge, and not only in Africa, but also here in the Western Hemisphere. No, Van Sertima didn't play that in his later years. And I
That's right.
respect these men who are not interested in women too, interested in running for office and being politically correct. But they'll say it because it's right. And none were more direct and more honest than the great scholar himself, John Henry Clark, who didn't have a formal education,
That's right.
but this man rose to such heights of respect that very few scholars could hold that man's books.
And of course, you mentioned Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, author of They Came Before Columbus. So you believe that our current condition of miseducation is because we didn't engage in productive debate, vetting the information that we received, and maintaining the integrity of that information. Is that right?
Yes, you just said it in 5 seconds. That's exactly what I meant to say. Yes, we just didn't have. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Well said. Well, okay, so here we are, 2 decades removed from the 80s, and our youth are the recipients of all that miseducation, all of that lost progress. In addition to that, they're under attack more than ever before, from the school to prison pipeline to miseducation that we've passed on to them, and that's being passed on to them in traditional quote unquote halls of learning. And from your position, working with young minds on the front lines of academia, I know you know this firsthand. So my question for you is, how do we begin to inspire our youth to take responsibility as the next generation of scholars to pick up what we sort of lost momentum for back in the 80s and into the early 90s?
Well, I think at this point, one of the great problems is that the youth don't see enough of us being serious enough,
That's right.
long enough, and
That's right.
consistent enough. So if somebody sees me, the one question they will never have to ask me, well, brother, are you still doing your work? No, no, that's not the question. The question is, what are you working on now?
That's
So I
right.
don't quit. So we have to be finishers in a world of starters. And and I say that folks in this country, and this definitely includes black folks, are among the best in the world when it comes to quitting. People here are the best when it comes to quit. They'll quit at the drop of a hat. And
That's right.
and not only that, then those that don't quit, the other thing that the youth see is that a lot of times we have annual events, and we have the annual events this year because they took place last year. Why did we do it last year? Because we did it the year before.
That's right.
And and it's like it's a chore. I mean, sometimes people don't take it serious. It's not well organized, not well publicized. If some folks show up, great. If
Right.
like somebody called me last week and asked, could we in our Save Nubia project, could we vend at a local event? Now, this event's supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know, I think she might have said the 29th or somewhere. I know it's the end of this month. Now,
November.
something like that. Yeah, so sometime in late November. And there's no information yet. There's no information, not about the vending, but about the information about the event in general. So I mean,
Wow.
how many people
Wow.
do you expect to be there? And so one of my colleagues said, "Well, brother, I don't think we should participate because he said that a few years ago he went and they did some vending and nobody was there." And that it's probably going to be the same way now. But the youth see this, and I've told people, I tell them all the time I work with, if you're not serious about the event, cancel it.
That's right.
You'll do far more good by canceling an event that you're not serious. Forget about the annual this and that. If we're not serious about it, be honest. Because the youth then think it's fine to just throw together a Mickey Mouse event that has no real value, because that's really the message that's being presented, because the youth see us, and it's hard for us who are a little bit older to inspire people when they know that we're not that sincere about it. And one thing that is missing that will help us guide the youth is we have to reconstitute the African rites of passage system.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
the system is a much broader system than what we've tried to implement here in the U.S. So it's really 5 major African initiation rites, and they really extend from birth to death and beyond. And so what we typically see across the country, and these are well-meaning efforts, that there are great brothers and sisters who do their best to create these rites of passage programs for youth to become adults. The problem is the initiators, those that are doing the initiation and organizing these programs, they themselves haven't been initiated. So you can't teach what you don't know. And not only that, but it's not just that one right of becoming an adult. It's a much broader system, and until we reconstitute, first of all, to understand and reconstitute this system, I don't really see how we can systematically direct and correct and guide the youth to be community oriented, responsible adults. So we have the right of birth, the right of becoming an adult, the right of marriage, the right of becoming an elder, and there's a big difference between an elder and simply an older person. And then that fifth right is becoming an ancestor, and there's a difference between an ancestor and a dead relative.
Now, what
But
are those differences? What's the difference between an elder and a person of age?
The big difference between an elder and simply an older person is someone who's just lived a little bit longer than most, and they're older.
Mm.
But an elder is somebody that has lived a distinguished life. This is a person who represents the principles that and practices that are models for everyone else to follow. An elder is someone who is the best example for the community. An elder always seems to have younger people around him or her to teach them, to guide them, to direct them.
So we're talking about the difference between age and wisdom, character and existence.
Very much so, because an older person could just be somebody a little bit older. That person could be a drunk, a thief, a scoundrel, and that person, an older person, has never gotten the kind of deference in African culture that an elder has, that elders command. And there's a difference. Not only that, but the elder has gone through the previous rites. You know, elder has a mission in life versus an older person. And when they pass on, when a respected elder passes on and becomes an ancestor, that person is respected and revered, and people stop what they're doing to pay their last rites, their last respects to the person. And sometimes it has to be multiple events because the one event can't accommodate everybody's schedule or the venue's not big enough. But an older person, when that person passes on, many times we don't even know about it. It's not even news. It doesn't really matter.
That's right.
And there's hardly anybody there. You know, maybe the janitor, the pallbearer, and maybe the minister to say a word or two, and we might find out months or later or the next year that the person passed. But there's a fundamental difference between a dead relative and a respected ancestor. But that ancestor is a respected elder who's just crossed over, who's passed on, whereas the older person now becomes a dead relative. And African tradition always looked that way. But if we really look at this whole system, beginning with birth, so we can look at birth charts and determine what a young person's mission is in life and the community, and is helping the family help direct and guide the young person on their mission, then we are on the path of reconstituting this system of what people, I guess, here would call the rites of passage, but this system, because right now, instead of the rite of birth, we tend to ignore that and then just jump right on into adulthood, and a lot of the key principles are missing. So to me, the reason why in traditional Africa the youth were community oriented, responsible, and knew what their social role was is because Africans didn't take it for chance. They didn't take it for granted. It was the system that molded people. Now here, people say, "Oh yeah, you know, youthhood and you know, teenage years is a difficult time." Well, it's difficult at any stage, so that's one thing. But the thing is, it's not so difficult if there's a system in place, and we have tried our best to reconstitute this system that was broken up and ripped apart during the enslavement period. But that's what we have to do if we're going to be successful in guiding and directing our youth.
So we need to start rebuilding that social system that ensured that everyone made a proper transition from one stage to another and filled their role in the larger scheme of things.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Well said. Well said. I'm definitely glad we were able to get you in for an interview, because I'm over here taking notes as I tend to do during interviews, and I'm just flying through pages. We have so much more to learn, so much more to recapture, and I honestly believe we can only do that by sitting at the feet of our scholars and sitting at the feet of our elders, as we're doing here and now. We're talking with author, researcher, and professor of history Manu Ampim. You are listening to United Black America Radio. Professor Ampim, I want to start talking about specifically your work in the field of academics. And so we know that African history has been distorted in the past. We know that this is an effort on the part of Europeans to control information. Now, you've said that primary research is the most effective weapon against the distortion of African history and culture. So my question to you is, how can we start to use primary research to reclaim our right knowledge? And what is primary research while we're on the subject?
Well, I appreciate the question.
Hmm.
Primary research is firsthand investigation, it's firsthand examination.
Okay.
Primary research is when we go directly to the source, and it's the highest level of an investigation and assessment and analysis because we're not going through hearsay or anything else or historical gossip, as I like to call it, but we're going directly to the materials and sources. And so primary research has always been a weapon. And that's actually what has been used initially against us in the 19th century. So when European travelers and explorers and propagandists and writers began to write, they created this myth about Africa being some dark continent, and so they painted a picture for the West, for Europeans in the Western world to understand Africa. And so since Africa was supposedly backward and this and that, that gave them the social support from white folks in Europe and the U.S. to go and to ransack Africa, and we had issues that didn't allow us to properly defend ourselves. But it was people going out in the field. It's just that their primary research was associated with a propaganda story.
That's right.
You
That's right.
know, so and but for us, we have to use the same method, the same approach to going to the sites, going to the sources to be able to tell our story. So this is why I respect the great primary researchers like William Leo Hansberry, who never published. Hansberry at Howard University, he created the African history section of the African section of the history department at Howard University
That's right.
back in the 1930s, but 32. But Hansberry never published. He went to Oxford to study because there's so many records that have been stolen. He did work in Africa, and one of his students, the great Chancellor Williams, followed in the footsteps
Hmm.
of Hansberry, and so because their work was to correct the record. People like George G.M. James, it was to correct the record in his book Stolen Legacy, and I was inspired by that because these were people, not so much James. James's work, Stolen Legacy, written in '54, is a classic. I've written a recent introduction to it, and to critique the book. It's a classic, but there are some flaws, but it doesn't take away from its central thesis that the Greeks, they got what they got from Africans, and it's been reclaimed as theirs. So it doesn't take away from its central thesis, but there are some issues there. But nevertheless,
True indeed.
but but with Chancellor Williams and William Leo Hansberry and others, and the great Sheikh Anta Diop, I saw the use of primary research methods to as a weapon to destroy and refute the outrageous claims that some non-African travelers from Western Asia came in and created civilization in Northeast Africa. That they created certainly that they somehow created a pyramid culture in Africa that they couldn't create at home, which is completely illogical to say the least. And so for me, when I started to go out in the field and apply the primary research tools and techniques I learned, this was in 1989, and that really launched my work out in the field. I recognized that going out and documenting, looking at documents in libraries and archives, and then going to museums to study artifacts. I studied well over 1 million artifacts over a year period in 1989 and '90 throughout Europe. I've done systematic field research in Northeast Africa, whether it's been in Kemet or Sudan or Ethiopia, to look at the region that created the greatest um, development in the history of humanity. We look at the apex of human achievement,
That's right.
and I recognize by going to pyramid sites, temple sites, tomb sites, and ancient residential sites, I then would be able to have firsthand knowledge, firsthand be able to examine and evaluate firsthand what the real story was, and I was inspired by these. I was also inspired by the late great Asa Hilliard by when he was on
That's
Lister
right.
Belt Middleton's program For the People, doing an interview, and he's talking about how to categorize the knowledge and information we had in a way that can help us to systematically study African culture. And that's when, learning skills and tools and techniques on the one hand is important, but applying it is something that is very different and very and much more important. And that's when I really recognized. And when I came back to the States in 90 and 91 and started to now write and really synthesize all of what I learned, that's when I understood even more that primary research is the fundamental tool to be able to dismiss the old propaganda and lies, because in the realm of serious research, documentation beats conversation. And we gain that documentation from going directly to the sources. And so when I've gone to the numerous archaeological sites and museums and institutes and libraries, now I'm talking from someone who didn't just read what someone else said or wrote, which is fine, but there's a whole nother level. And that other level is primary research, where we're going directly to the sites, directly to the sources, and using this insight as a weapon, as a tool to dismiss old writings, old propaganda, and misunderstanding. That is the fundamental tool that will separate our work from those that have been kind of mediocre in their approach, because now it's a totally different level. And I say to the people that are really most respected in the field of chematology and classical African studies and looking at Africa, and whose work will really stand the test of time, are those that have elevated the work to the level of primary or first-hand research, because no matter what attacks there are, even if someone can find a little issue here or there, that their fundamental work will not be challenged effectively. This is why people try to chip away at the work of Cheikh Anta Diop, but being such a multi-genius, working in the field of physics and mathematics and chemistry and linguistics. So these fools couldn't even hold the books of Diop in these areas. So when they want to argue in one field, he brings out evidence as a scientist in another field, and they can't even discuss, let alone evaluate what the man's presented. And this is like a primary researcher's primary research. He's the researcher's example of how do you present a powerful argument against your opponent.
True indeed. True indeed. I like that. I like that statement that you threw out there. Documentation beats conversation. I'm gonna keep that.
Yes, sir.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something really quickly, and I also want to talk about the classical African contributions to the world in the fields of math and science. Before we do that, you say that the Greeks got what they got from Africa. And oftentimes, when I'm having conversations with people in coffee shops, people throw out that fact. Well, the Greeks were really the ones behind Egypt or Kemet. And we see it portrayed in the media. Back during Hollywood's quote-unquote golden age, we saw movies like Greatest Story Ever Told, and there was a white Egyptian pharaoh and white Egyptians. And even today, there's a television miniseries that portrays all white Egyptians. And of course, all of the slaves and servants are black. Now, why do we believe still in this day that the people of Kemet, the people that built one of the greatest civilizations humankind has ever seen, why do we still believe that they were whites? And how do we know that the Greeks got what they got from Africa? How can we start to refute people that approach us with that ignorance?
Yeah, it is ignorance. And now, since the Cairo Symposium took place, and a few decades ago, since the Cairo Symposium, where there were 20, the United Nations, or UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, they convened 20 of the world's leading Egyptologists to discuss the question, what were the race of the so-called Egyptians? And since that symposium in 1974, they had no evidence to show that classical Africa was created by any Arabs or white folks. But going into the conference, that was one of the, if not the main idea, that classical Kemet, so-called Egypt, was a Caucasoid civilization. But Diop and his colleague Theophile Obenga from the Congo, they destroyed that quite thoroughly. It was an academic butt kicking that took place on an international scale. It's one of the greatest intellectual whoopings that anybody can ever read about that took place. And so since that time, these mainstream Egyptologists, they no longer write scholarly books arguing that classical Africa was created by some outsiders who were not black. But what has happened now is that this is when Hollywood, this is when National Geographic and other publications have come along to, rather than argue things scholarly, they simply present modern paintings, modern drawings, and that's and cartoons. That's the propaganda angle
That's
now.
right. And you have the History Channel, who still
Absolutely.
tends to portray the people of Kemet as either being Arab looking or white. So, yeah, definitely.
Exactly, and you're right. In the History Channel, Discovery Channel, and the old Learning Channel, this is nothing but what I call these docudramas. Because what they
Mm.
do is that it's tricky camera work. They'll show an artifact for maybe 3 seconds and then slide over to a modern drawing of a light-skinned, white-skinned person, and then the average person is just trying to grasp the content. They're not looking at the switching of images.
That's right.
And then all the actors are light skinned, white skinned. So that's really what the public is getting. But in scholarly forms, the position is, oh well, they were mixed, and who cares about race? And so
Mm.
that's the common position of the mainstream Egyptologists.
Right. While
They
I'm
say
while I'm
now
even
race
thinking
doesn't
about
matter.
it, they'd even rather attribute the founding of Kemet to aliens. There's a series, a long running series called Ancient Aliens. They'd rather
Yes,
just say aliens came down from the heavens above, built the pyramids, or taught early man how to build these artifacts that they find on the continent.
exactly. Exactly, and then ascend back up to Mars, and this comes from the work and I was surprised that the man was still around.
Was he?
Charity of the God.
Yeah,
Uh,
Zachariah Stitchin.
well, before him, there was that's one, but I think of his name. But he wrote Chariot of the Gods in the mid 1960s. I was surprised that the man was still around, and so he's one of the stars in Ancient Aliens. And so yeah, and then you have people like John Anthony
Got it.
West.
Got it. Eric von Daniken.
And when I saw Eric von Donigan still being interviewed on the History Channel, I was surprised because his propaganda was around in the 80s, going very strong. But to see that
Mm.
man still around misinforming the public with his old book is absolutely amazing. And his film came, it was, so if people look up Chariots of the Gods, there's the book in the 60s, and then this film came out around 1970 about the Chariot of the Gods. That's where this propaganda comes from. But we've certainly been winning the scholarly battle, but not the public media battle, and
Mm.
that's been the difference here. That's the big difference.
Mm. Mm. Well said. Well said. Thank you for touching on that for us. That was kind of a side quest that we went on, but I know a lot of our listeners are big fans of the History Channel. They try and keep up with their history. They try and learn about themselves through that medium. And I always warn them against doing that because there's a lot of trickery and miseducation going on, even from this quote unquote reputed source. Their business is not education. Their business is entertainment. And so thank you again. Could you speak really briefly about some of the classical African contributions to the world in math and science? And I'm thinking specifically about a lecture that you gave on Ptah Hotep that really opened up my eyes and that sent me on a much deeper quest to obtain this information.
Well, I appreciate the question, brother Assad.
Mm-hmm.
The the contributions from classical Africa are many, and one of the things is I've put together a presentation to just summarize some of the most significant contributions in the history of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
from writing and medicine and math and the calendar, social organization, and you name it. But if we look specifically at math, of course, there are high schoolers across the U.S. that have to learn geometry, and they learn the old propaganda that Pythagoras somehow is created the Pythagorean theorem.
That's right.
This, the square of the hypotenuse, that a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
That's right.
This is high level propaganda. And so what I share with people is that 1,000 years before Pythagoras, who lived about 500 BCE, we have the Almos mathematical papyrus. The official name of the mainstream Egyptologists that have given to the document is the Rhine mathematical papyrus, simply
Mm.
because Alexander Henry Rhine bought the papyrus in the 1850s. But the document itself is dated to about 1600 BCE. So that's 3,400 years after the document, this mathematical document was created. The European Rhine bought it. And but we say it's the Amos mathematical papyrus because the scribe Amos said that he was given the instructions to copy the document from an older document that was decaying. You know, all paper decays. So around 1600, there were a lot of documents that were being, and scribes had to literally copy by hand. There were no photocopy machines, no scanners, none of that in classical African civilization. So the scribes copied by hand. Amos does not claim the advanced mathematical knowledge. He simply indicates that he faithfully copied it from an older document. And so this Amos mathematical papyrus, or so-called Rhine in quotations, this is the oldest advanced mathematical textbook in the world, the oldest complete one. There's another one in Moscow, but this one is complete. There's 87 advanced mathematical problems that are on this Rhine papyrus, and it includes trigonometry and geometry, calculus, arithmetic. There's not one single mathematical error. The mathematicians and classical chemists were at their best. And this is theoretical math. It's not some trial and error, because there's no errors on it, and it's a systematic examination of these problems, and this is highly theoretical. And what's amazing about it, it's not just math, but it's like I said, the age of it is more than 1,000 years before the guy in Europe is even credited with it. But it's more than math. The document starts off, and the translation is it's an accurate method of counting for grasping the meaning of things and knowing everything that is, all mysteries and secrets. So it's far beyond math. This is one of the great mathematical texts. And so, and this is in the British Museum. It's on the second floor. Anybody can go and see it. It's a physical document. It's no secrets. It's right there. It's African. It is absolutely amazing. And yet people in the 10th grade around here learn something about this Pythagoras. I said, this document was created more than 1,000 years before even Pythagoras' mama knew him. His mama didn't even know him. And we know for a fact that he had nothing to do with geometry or no Greek, because first of all, there's no teachers of geometry in Greece during the time of Pythagoras or even before him. There's no schools, Greek schools or tradition teaching geometry. There's no books, there's no documents, there's nothing. But
So
what
how
we
did they
do,
learn?
they, as you know, they left Greece, and according to Greek writers themselves, Pythagoras went to Kemet and studied for 22 years under African priests. They were very specific, a 22-year education. So the man leaves Greece knowing nothing about geometry and advanced math. After 22 years sitting at the feet of African priests, he comes back and now is teaching something that he didn't know when he left. Amazing about this is that if anybody sees the Amos Papyrus, it is a systematic mathematical textbook which is beautifully laid out, line by line, problem by problem. And even if somebody is not the greatest mathematical thinker, they can still see a damn the triangle on on the papyrus. So at least if they have reasonable eyesight, they can see that they were calculating these advanced mathematical problems, and there are no errors. And that's what's special about this. So that's, and then there are various writers talking about the life of Pythagoras. There's Herodotus, there's Isocrates, there's Plutarch that document the fact that the man went and studied in Africa and learned. And then we have the application of math dealing with the pyramids, where there's no mathematical errors. And you have geometry demonstrated on a grand scale. This is the application of geometry. If someone looks at, for example, the great pyramids in Giza, which it's a pyramid complex. There's about 9 of them there. But the 3 that people know about, if they look at just the great one by Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, but you can see these are perfect. Every side is a perfect triangle.
Perfect.
And yeah, absolutely perfect. And the aerial views clearly show that. So there's 4 equilateral triangles, and we know that with 4 equilateral triangles equals a perfect square. But this is done by moving blocks of stone, 2.3 million blocks of stone to build monuments that confound the world. And there's an Arab proverb that all the world fears time, but time itself fears the pyramids.
That's right.
And these monuments were built for eternity. So I'm showing the documentation, and all people can do is sit down and be quiet because I don't care what they've been teaching. In my college, you have people that are arrogant, they don't know anything. You do a workshop, every now and then they might bring their behind over there, but no, they want to stay in their little cubby hole where they're comfortable and teach the Greek nonsense by using
That's right.
ridiculous textbooks that are not based on historical fact. Everything goes back to Europe, goes back to Greece, but the problem they have is that the students are learning. So the students will bring questions to class. And I must say, students don't always bring the questions back to class because they're fearing retaliation. But I do know that they now question the credibility of those that are presenting nothing but Europe to them in the classroom. But but the
That's right.
mathematical contributions are literally set in stone. And all someone would have to do is look at the Amos papyrus to document that. And even in medicine, the same thing. We have incredible documents. There's the so-called, and these names are named after the people that bought it or stole the documents. There's the Edwin Smith, quote unquote, surgical papyrus. Well, again, he bought this. He had nothing to do with creating this, but this is the oldest surgical document in the history of humanity, where there's 48 cases of neurosurgery. And this is very complicated. We know that
So we're
because
talking brain surgery in the ancient
brain,
world.
absolute brain and spinal cord surgery, and we got African documentation. Africans were the first to use trepanation, where they would drill a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. This is an African tradition, but if somebody goes online and they look up trepanation, you probably will find some game by that name, trepanation, where you got on the box, you got
That's
two
right.
young white children who are with a drill drilling a hole in the skull of the so-called patient. But this is not connected to its origin. And we know that the Greeks, for example, could not have performed surgery and did not because they believed that to carve or to open the human body was evil. This is how
Is that
backward they
right?
were. They believed it was an evil practice, and so they could not have known what Africans knew. And so you got advanced neurosurgery from the top of the crown to the base of the spine. I mean, a clinical analysis that if a person's paralyzed on the left side, they knew it was a blow to the right side. And
That's
this
right.
surgical virus is based on broken bones, injuries, and so forth. And we learned so much. I mean, the most common thing they used if it was to set a broken bone or deal with lacerations was honey. This is one of the only foods that doesn't spoil. Honey. And you see honey. They would wrap the bandage after they put honey on honey and then the bandage. Next day, the text tells the physicians exactly what to do. And so this is the oldest advanced medical tradition in the history of humanity. Not only that, but there's the oldest prosthetic toe in the world, a 3,000-year-old wooden artificial toe in the Cairo Museum. And what's amazing about the toe, not only is it the oldest in the history of humanity, but I like to point out to people, not only are we talking math here, but we're also talking about clearly an African identity, because that big toe, which would have been the right foot, that big toe is the darkest brown that you can that you can actually see. Is just short of a black color. So
You're
the
right.
question obviously is, why in the world would they use the darkest possible brown stone to represent that prosthetic toe? I'm sorry, it's not stone, it's wood. Excuse me. This wooden, this dark brown wood can match their other toes. That's why. So it's an African artificial toe. And we have, in the documentation is quite obvious here. You have the tools. We have at the Komombo Temple on the wall. There's about 37 or so images of surgical equipment.
Now,
We
what's the name of that temple?
Komombo, that would be Kom, and second word Ombo.
Okay.
uh, Mumble, and so we take people there to look at the actual surgical tools, the forceps, the the scale, the knives, the hooks, things to use, the drills in surgery because we have advanced surgeons and that's why the mummies, they look like they're just resting peacefully
That's
because
right.
of the African knowledge. There's over 200 terms, medical terms, for representing the body. So when we look at math and medicine and science, there's a long-standing tradition that is the foundation of what we now know today. There's nothing that is uh, is more of a broad foundation than what we have. Even giving birth. I mean, we have
Mm.
midwives in our community. It's a Western idea. It's crazy how the people in the West think. So women give birth and they're lying down on their back. I mean, just based on normal geometry. I'm sorry, physics or physics, it doesn't really make sense. Why? I mean, so you see the birthing stools in classical, women are sitting. They're sitting like you would if you were going potty. I mean, it just makes all the sense because of gravity. It just makes sense, and we can see that. We see documents that they were very knowledgeable about pregnancy and everything dealing with gynecology. There's the Kunum papyrus that outlines a lot of these details. There's the Ebers. Again, you got the guy that bought it. George Ebers buys the papyrus.
Right.
We have a papyrus dealing with 877 cases of internal medicine. It's the oldest internal medical document in the history of humanity. And this is a tradition that needs to be taught in medical school and in mathematical classrooms,
Indeed.
whether,
Indeed.
that is typically missing.
And I would also add that, in talking about all of these innovations that were the result of our great ancestral minds, prosthetics, neurology, theoretical mathematics, surgery, internal medicine, many of the youth, because we have a lot of young listeners, college age listeners, and so forth, many of our youth should be encouraged to put the balls down, put the basketball down, put the baseball down, and pick up those surgical tools, because in doing so, you are living the legacy, the intellectual legacy of your ancestors. And you can do much more to honor your people in picking up these practices, which ironically have started to be seen as white or Asian fields of study. When you go into the typical medical school, you see nothing but whites and Asians. Meanwhile, our people are exploring the easier fields, when in reality, we're the intellectual inheritors of this vast, vast legacy. So I think that would be a great point to start bringing up to our youths. These are what your ancestors did. Sure, you had all of these innovations in the field of athleticism, and you have all these advances, the Jackie Robinsons of the world and the Bo Jacksons of the world. But before that, you had the Imhoteps of the world.
Absolutely. And on our campus, this was last month. We the Center for Science Excellence, the director invited a brother, and I'm sorry, his name escapes me. He's a
Mm-hmm.
physicist to give a talk on one of the Fridays, and so there were students there majoring in different areas of either physics or
Now, you're not
engineering.
talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson, are you?
No, it's not.
Okay,
It's not
okay.
him. I'll get this brother's name in a minute. And so he was talking about, as I was saying earlier in the beginning, the sociology of knowledge. How he came
Mm.
to where he is. So he didn't talk about physics. He didn't talk about his work at the University of California at Davis, UC Davis, and as a physicist, he's talking about his early life, and he was a part of the movement in the 50s, in the 60s, and that he was a member of the Black Panther Party, and he
Mm.
was an activist in during his school days. He talked about that for most of the 45 minutes. And then the last 5 minutes, someone might have asked him a question, or maybe he planned to do this on his own. He put a math problem on the board. I mean, that's what his his physics thing was. He put a math problem, and it's interesting. I was standing next to a lady, uh, a a lady, the Euro American lady who teaches biology,
Mm-hmm.
and so she's back there um, trying to correct him during his lecture. So he had mentioned something about someone asked a question about math, and he answered it before he put the problem on the board. But her thing is that so she leans over because I got there about a couple minutes after he started, and so she thought it was good to tell me that, well, he didn't really say what he was going to talk about. He didn't really have a set agenda. He just started talking. So it was like a criticism. In other words, his lecture was
Right,
all over
right,
the
right.
place. That was her point. And then her other thing, she's trying to correct and guide him through his through the problem he put up there. And so, well, you don't really have to do it that way. It can be done that way. Well, maybe it's just not that good in front of the room. So she was intimidated. And not only that, but she's looking for some strict, quote unquote, scientific discussion that is removed from the social context. So when folks are able to merge the social and scientific,
Mm,
like the great Sheikh Anta Diop and others, these linear people like her, they have
right.
problems, and they're intimidated because he's at a level that she'll never be. His life is far more richer than hers would ever be, and he's the guest speaker that is teaching the students, and not her.
Mm, mm.
so so I said, you know what, this is a so I didn't challenge her because I'm listening to him, but it's
That's
great to
right.
get this kind of input from a person that clearly was intimidated by this brother.
And then you see where the head is at as well.
Exactly. So now I got the drop on her because I understand her thinking. But for me, don't get carried away. You can make your little comments here or there, but if you go overboard, I'm gonna jam you up and check you right there. So she never
That's
really
right.
got to that stage, but I understood what was motivating her to make these little comments.
That's right. And it becomes an unproductive distraction too, because had you jumped in, then other audience members would have jumped in, and the whole presentation would have been lost. A lot of value would have been lost. Um, thank you. I appreciate that story. By the way, that was I found that hilarious. I had to put the microphone on mute while I'm listening to you. Um, so each year, okay, so we're in the process of trying to correct miseducation. We're in the process of trying to reclaim our heritage, understand who we are by looking through the lens of the past with our own eyes versus Eurocentric eyes. But every year we're losing more and more of our physical history to, natural disasters, destruction, theft, and propaganda. So, what are you doing as one of the preeminent fighters on the academic field to stop that?
But what I've done, I've formed a advancing the research here in Oakland, California, and it's to do just that: advance the research, to teach people primary research methods, to share my field work, findings, publications, workshops, and things like that. And a part of the advancing the research is the Save Nubia project, and this Save Nubia project emerged from my field work where I saw the systematic destruction and damage, deliberate damage to images and inscriptions on temple and tomb walls.
Mm,
Mainly, I first saw this in Kemet back, and I noticed it in 1994, and I was wondering why in the world people who were traveling to Kemet on a regular basis not be alarmed by what was quite obvious, and that is the
that's right.
systematic destruction of images and inscriptions thousands of years old on temples and tombs. I mean, it's just quite obvious. And not only was it obvious, you see in many cases, particularly in the 90s, you would see the culprits doing their dastardly work with scaffolding,
Mm,
with their chisels, with buckets, with water, with this white Portland cement substance to plaster over images that were
wow.
intact. Just um, it was so with a few vicious chips or stabs to the wall. Now you have a whole section just obliterated, and then looking
Thousands of
at the
years.
thousands of years, you have literally rubble right there at the feet with images and inscriptions that were intact just minutes ago. So I decided to not only write the Vanishing Evidence series, the Vanishing Evidence of Classical African Civilizations, but as I started going further up south into Nubia and going either further up south into Sudan, because as we go south, we're going uphill.
That's
I
right.
recognize that there's even more problems. I mean, I already knew this from the defacement of artifacts in museums, the reshaping of nose and lips, the systematic
Mm,
erasing of paint colors, and all of those, and outright forgeries. I've seen that, But then out in the field, I'm seeing it now on monuments, and then going further south into Sudan. And what really drew me to Sudan about initially 7 years ago is the fact that there is a series of dams that are proposed to be built to flood the entire area of the northern part of Sudan around the fourth, the third, the second, the third, and the fourth cataracts. The cataracts are like large boulders and rapids in the area,
Okay.
and so we know dams have been built. There's the Aswan High Dam finished in 1970 that
That's right.
flooded 39 Nubian villages and that destroyed more African artifacts at the bottom of Lake Nasser, or the Nubians call it Lake Nubia. There's more artifacts at the bottom of that lake than we can ever imagine.
And
And
they're
so
gone
I've
forever.
gone. Never know what was there. And some things were saved, but the vast majority gone. And one of the things that keeps artifacts preserved is their dryness. So we can forget about it. It's gone. So we knew about that great tragedy. And then I was going to Sudan because of the Merowe Dam that was scheduled and was completed in 2008. And that dam flooded a 70-mile long area, and it flooded a 108-mile long area and dislocated 70,000 Sudanese. And so at the bottom of this reservoir created is a minimal 2,500 previously unknown, unexcavated ancient Kushite archaeological sites gone. 2,500, not artifacts, but whole sites gone, obliterated. And so I knew that if I didn't do something, then nothing would get done. So I decided to form the Save Nubia project back in early 2002 to try to do the best I could to duplicate and replicate and amplify my efforts into a collective work to try to save, not try, but work to make sure we can save the archaeological region in Sudan that represents ancient Nubia and Kush, because these dams, they really threaten to turn the Nile River into a series of isolated lakes. They will destroy the ecology in the area. It will not only dislocate hundreds of thousands of people, more than those that have already been dislocated, but also the permanent flooding of the homelands and the rich archaeological areas. So our work is to help save. We say save Nubia, but it's also Kush as well. More people are familiar with Nubia, so that was just for marketing purposes. Because when most people think about that so much, particularly young people, because I remember I was doing a presentation on this. I was doing a presentation on the
And they
historical
quick to get behind that.
significance.
They was, oh yeah, we trying to save the Kush. Yeah.
Historical significance of Kush. One of the brothers said, "What? Kush?" I said, "No, young brother. No, hold on. This issue. I'm
That's
not
right.
talking
Yeah,
about
you are
those."
on the West Coast, so yeah, I can see how there would be some misinterpretation there. Yeah, definitely. I'm checking it out right now. How much money have you raised?
Close to maybe 8,000, I suppose.
That's right. I'm just curious as to why UNESCO hasn't already declared this as a disaster area, because it's heartbreaking hearing about all of the artifacts, all of the unexcavated sites that we'll never know about, pieces of our history that are lost forever that could have made the difference in a lot of respects. So I'm wondering why they haven't yet made this a priority. UNESCO is who I'm talking about.
The reason why is because it's like this. These dam projects, and by the way, there's more than one way to spell a dam project.
That's right.
But these projects are they are initiated by the Omar Bashir government, and so this is a Sudanese government initiated
That's right. We're talking northern
project.
Sudanese.
Yes, exactly. And the way in which sites are designated as World Heritage sites is that the governments themselves, the country themselves, has to make the proposal to UNESCO, and then every year the World Heritage Center, and this is a part of United Nations, the World Heritage Center meets. There are scientists, there are linguists, scholars, archaeologists, historians that meet. They make proposals. They look at and examine proposals to see what sites should remain on the World Heritage List, which ones should be added, which ones should now be considered under threat. And so the Sudanese government under Bashir, they're about making money. So
That's right.
there's a branch of the government called NCAM, the National Corporations of Antiquities and Museums. So I'm working with NCAM because that's the cultural wing, and of course they see the need to preserve the sites, but they don't want to be in opposition to the president and lose their jobs and have other problems. So we have to
Right.
continue to work with NCAM and really press the issue that the local people in these affected regions, they absolutely flat out disagree with these dam projects. They don't want to
No
be
doubt.
flooded out of their homeland. As a matter of fact, the Nubians in the Third Cataract area, in the Kashbar Dam area, they, if someone goes on to YouTube, they just put in Kashbar Dam, Kajbar, they can see the Kashbar Dam massacre where there's peaceful protests
Mm.
that turned into the police in Sudan shooting, the military shooting tear gas, and then the tear gas turned into live rounds, all because the people
Mm.
were peacefully protesting that they don't want to be flooded out of their homeland and moved from their ancestral place, the place of origin. And so it's not just us in the West telling people what they should do and how they should live. It's us supporting the local people and helping them amplify their voice. But there's a whole lot of resistance in Sudan. There's resistance in Kenya and other places that don't want these dam projects to be built. And right now, if nothing's done, if people continue to do these study tours to the Nile Valley and not become active, then at some point they'll continue with the dam projects. The only reason there's been a law is because the Nubians, the Cebu and Jeti villages have rose up and kicked out these engineers and these workers, not only from Sudan, but they brought in Chinese engineers, Chinese workers to help with the project, and they've been pushed out. So now the government knows that the Third Cataract area, the Kashbar area, is a flashpoint, and they now have to strategically try to go back in there, but they know that it's a tense area and people are ready for anybody to come in. So who knows when they're going to go back in? But when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar deals, these things don't just get taken off of the table because of a little resistance.
That's
They
right.
have their agenda there. They're just not going to tell anybody when they're going to come back in. So our Save Nubia project is to is to document and record the absolute values. So we have the highest quality documentation of it, a great documentary, but also to get these sites recognized as World Heritage Sites, and then thirdly to help the local people in the Third Cataract area, the Nubians, to build a series of museums to also help highlight the importance of their ancestral homeland. And I wanted to make one correction too, brother. I right now on our Save Nubia project, we have collected about, right now it's about almost 14,000 so far.
Mm. But still a long way to go. And here
A long way.
I think our interview comes full circle because as you're talking about the fight that's taking place at the Third Cataract, in the beginning of this interview, we talked about Dr. Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in that book, he talks about the ancient fight for the Third Cataract as our great ancestors, the men and women responsible for Kemet, were pushed south into Nubia. They again stood their ground at the Third Cataract in an effort to resist who were then known as the Hyksos, who we now know are the Arab invaders, from continuing to devastate their ancestral homeland. And here we are again. The destruction of black civilization continues, and our stand continues. Great
Yes,
interview.
sir.
Magnificent interview. Not only did we learn a lot, but we now have a target. We now know what we should be doing to help save these invaluable, priceless contributions to humanity at the Third Cataract with the Save Nubia project. We stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and this is a call to action for all of our listeners. Before we wrap up here, Dr. Ampim, is there anything that I haven't asked you in this interview that you would like to discuss, or or that you'd like to include?
Well, brother, aside, I think we covered a good chunk. There's always much more.
Much more.
I would simply say to folks, the work continues, and if they go to savenubia.org, but also to my other sites, just my name. If they go to Manu Ampim You know, I have materials there. I'm on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel. There's some video clips there. Twitter as well, so they can join me on social media and stay in the know and also be informed about how they can help the work. And one thing we haven't posted yet, but they will be posted, so people can go and look for a lot of our important products, like the Save Nubia 2015 calendars. We have monthly calendars with the images that relate to the project. We have also a pocket calendar and planner that's useful for those that travel a lot, and many other things that are practical items that people can use as cultural gifts or also keep for themselves. So these are ways
clothing,
people.
we got posters, we got stationery, we got CDs and DVDs, and of course books and booklets. So we're checking it out right now.
Yes, sir. It's all about continuing to be consistent for a consistent period of time. That's what leaders do.
That's right. That's right. Professor Manu Ampim, this has truly been a pleasure. You've done us a great honor by coming on to United Black America Radio, dropping jewels for the family. I had a great time doing this interview. I hope you had a great time as well. And
thank you so much, brother. I mean, it's been my pleasure as well.
Ashe, you are always welcome here. So a few real quick calls to action. If our listeners don't do one thing, what is the one thing that they should do as their call to action?
Support the Save Nubia Project and learn the tools and techniques of primary research.
You got it. You got it. All right. Again, Professor Manu Ampim, it's been a pleasure. This concludes our interview, but our platform is your platform. We're at panafricanalliance.com, and in the past, we've actually published or republished a lot of your work. We talked about the need for debate, research, and how to debate productively, because what I'm noticing in the community is they debate as a form of mental masturbation. It's just debating to be debating. No resolutions are reached, just kind of like, I'm going to bludgeon you with the sound of my voice, and some contrived facts, quote unquote. So we really draw on your work a lot. So your teachings, your influence has much further reach than I believe you know. So we appreciate it.
Thanks so much, brother.
Talk to you later. Peace.
Okay. All right, peace.
Peace, family. That ends today's show. And if you haven't heard of Professor Manu Ampim up until now, I hope that this interview has encouraged you to go out and find out more about the invaluable work that this brother continues to contribute to the community. He is one of the upstanding members of the Black and Conscious movement. This is what it's about. This is what it's about. Men like him. And of course, those of you who support the show and who are members of this community, members of this movement, members of our organization. Of course, I'm always going to ask you to go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. If you don't know how to do that, check out the show notes where this show is posted. Go to panafricanalliance.com and you'll see it on the front page. If not, click on podcasts and you can track this episode down. Also, subscribe for future episodes. We changed our publication date to Wednesday. And the reason for that is there are a lot of really good shows in the community that all drop on Monday. And I don't want to overwhelm myself, let alone the family, because, I like to listen to other radio shows too. And so we're changing it up. We're going to do it on Wednesday instead. So you can join us at panafricanalliance.com every Wednesday for a brand new episode of the most revolutionary radio show on the airwaves, United Black America Radio. Also, I've included instructions on how to subscribe in the show notes. So family, thank you for giving me time, letting me into your place, in your space. Build, love, cooperate, and unite. All else is talk. And I'll see you next Wednesday right here at United Black America Radio.